welcome everyone. I want to thank you all for joining us today for the sixth in our series of post-COVID-19 panel discussions, Biotech Licensing Strategies in a COVID-19 World. This is brought to you by Kineticos Life Sciences. Just a little bit about Kineticos really quick. We are a specialized management consulting firm serving the life sciences industry since 2007. Our firm focuses on corporate strategy, business development, and commercial execution, identifying opportunities that deliver innovative solutions, driving strategic growth for our clients around the world. And I'm going to introduce Philip. He's our moderator today, and he's also the Chief Commercial Officer of our consulting firm.
Thank you, Marlena. Again, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As Marlena said, I'm Philip Galinas. I'm Chief Commercial Officer for Kineticos, and I'll be your moderator. I want to start by first welcoming our panelists today and have them spend just a brief moment introducing themselves. So I'm going to start off by giving an opportunity to Dr. Hugh Davis. He's the Chief Operating Officer and also President of Biotech USA. So Hugh, a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, good morning, everyone, or everywhere in the world you may be. Yeah, Hugh Davis, 35 years in biotech and pharma, most recently with Janssen for 17 years, put 6 drugs, biologics on the market with a very established and capable team in development sciences. Also then I moved on to Frontage Labs. We took Frontage public in Hong Kong Exchange last year. And then I had the great pleasure of joining Mingju Chen, who's the CEO and founder of Biotech. It's a late discovery, early development company, 15 different assets moving toward IND. And we're very excited about now growing Biotech around the world. We're both in US and China in Nanjing. Thank you for having me here today.
Okay. And thank you, Hugh. I'm going to move on. Also with us is Dr. Kyle Kimball. He's the Director of Intellectual Property and Business Development for NoBio. So, Kyle.
Hi, Phil, and good morning. My name is Kyle Kimball. I'm, as Phil said, the Director of IP and Business Development at NoBio. NoBio is a patent holding company with a number of operating subsidiaries across the life sciences space. And we're primarily focused on nitric oxide releasing technologies.
Okay, thank you, Kyle. We'll move on. We also have with us Dr. Oscar Segurado, and he is Chief Medical Officer at ASC Therapeutics. So I'll turn it over to you, Oscar.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for having me today. I'm right now, as you mentioned, Chief Medical Officer of ASC Therapeutics. This is a company focused on gene therapy and cell therapies, especially in the hemophilia space, blood disorders, coagulation disorders. Before that, I've been working in also these 2 spaces with a number of biotechs in the past 8 years. And I had also some corporate experience, 15 years with Abbott AbbVie and 4 years with Becton Dickinson. Before that, I've been working as a clinician scientist, mostly focusing on immunology. So my work has been focused on immunotherapies, immunodiagnostics. And although now I'm working in gene therapy for hemophilia, you may think, okay, what is an immunologist doing there? And I can tell you that's a lot, because we are infecting the liver on purpose with a virus, and there is an immune response taking place there. So that's something that makes my work very interesting, and also very relevant in terms of interacting with other companies and looking for in-licensing and also out-licensing.
Okay, thank you, Oscar. And last but not least, we have with us Nathan Finger. He is Director of Operations here at Kineticos Life Science. So Nathan.
Good morning, all. As Philip mentioned, I'm Nathan Finger, Director of Operations here at Kineticos. I help support and run all of our client projects, specifically around the business and development and licensing projects that we have.
Okay, thank you, Nathan. So guys, why don't we get started? Again, we're looking at the impact of COVID-19 on business development and licensing strategies for biotechs. One of the things I want to know before we jump into this is that we will save the last 15 minutes of our time together for your questions. So feel free to, during the discussion, feel free to enter your questions into the Zoom chat box. And then with that last 15 minutes, we'll try to open up the mics, let everybody share with us or with the panelists their questions, and we'll have a Q&A session. And again, we will try to get to everybody's questions as time permits. But why don't we go ahead and move over to our discussion with our panelists, and we're going to start with the first question that I'll throw out to the panel to discuss. And really, it's just a high-level question, which is, what is the sense of the panel of the impact and specific aspects, your specific aspects of business development and licensing, and how you've adopted or changed your approach due to COVID-19. Some ideas would be around shifts in targeting, shifts in communication, shifts in the ability to perform specific necessary activities, but just the full gamut of how this has impacted business development and licensing for you. I'm going to start off, I'm going to throw this over to Kyle to kick us off, and then I'll ask the others to join in. So Kyle.
Thank you, Cole. So I think the most apparent thing with the COVID-19 has been the shift of a lot of availability of funds related to infectious disease. I think that infectious disease had for a long time been sort of the backwaters of licensing and IP work as well. And I think with the COVID-19 challenges, you see a really significant increase in activity around infectious disease, particularly in the areas of vaccine development and antiviral work, obviously in light of the pandemic. And so I think that presents a lot of new opportunities that really had not been as available prior to this pandemic. I think before the main focus was oncology, and not to saying that the main focuses aren't still what they are. I know that the activities in other disease areas and chronic disease is still important and ongoing, but I think that you see a rise in the activity of infectious disease work, particularly. In terms of some of the practical issues of licensing work, I think the biggest change has been the stop of all travel and therefore the inability to have a lot of in-person meetings. And I think there's a lot of value to in-person meetings, and obviously moving to a Zoom platform or the remote platform for business development has been something that's been rapid, and obviously it's still enabling work getting done, but I think that the biggest shift in the way we take on our business development has been that it really is virtual and limited in its travel.
Okay. Would anybody? Yeah, go ahead, Hugh.
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right, Kyle. I really like the personal interactions. I think that's how deals get done. I think that's how you feel comfortable about the people you're going to be working with in a partnering situation. I did find that kind of an upside. We were at Bio, and it was all virtual, of course. We could not have been anywhere near as productive if it wasn't virtual, because Biocean had 52 meetings over the course of the 4 days, and you'd get off one Zoom call right onto the next. And I think I've learned so many different platforms between WebEx and Skype and Teams and you name it. But I found a lot more engagement because people were dedicated, they were focused, and they were available. So there was a bit of an upside, although I really do appreciate that personal interaction like you indicated.
Okay. Anything to add, Oscar, as far as your view?
I think we are all touching on the same point, which is the human element. And this is what in some way is missing when we are in a Zoom meeting versus being in person, because you have the body language. You have even these kind of irrelevant conversations that you have in the sides that make you trust the other person in a different way than happens when you are in a Zoom meeting. But I agree with Hugh on productivity. And we were working together with you guys, Kineticos, and we were able to select out of many, many opportunities, 32 meetings that were tremendously productive. So you could move from one meeting to another. You didn't have to go to different rooms. And we are all getting used to this kind of work. And I have the impression that when we move out of this very critical period with COVID, we're going to see that we're going to adapt some of the things that we have learned during this period, and ensuring that we interact with people using technology, but maybe with the advantage of now being able to meet other people. So I think that it has plus and minuses.
Okay. And last, anything, Nathan, to add?
I think everybody's made a big point about the human element, right? You have the efficiencies of being able to do these Zoom calls, putting them back to back, but you miss out on some of the body language style, right? Everybody can see shoulders up, so you don't get a full body language from being in the room with these individuals. And it comes a little bit into the trust element, but you also see it with when you get on these Zoom calls, you don't always have to have your video up. So being able to say, if somebody doesn't have or does have their video up, how is that impacting the way we communicate? But one of the big things that I think really impacted conferences like Bio is, while we're able to still hold these meetings, do them through Zoom, the networking events, the receptions, everything that happens kind of after the 8 to 6 o'clock timeframe of being in the conference, I think that's what we're missing out a lot of. You get more of that interpersonal relationships that you're building during those events. And so I think that's a big thing that we end up missing. The meetings are important, talking to all the potential partners are important, but being able to go to these networking events, these receptions, a lot of business happens there. And I think that's, what we're missing from these going virtual.
Okay, right. And I know one of the things I think everybody was kind of thinking about was whether or not as this type of situation occurred, would this create an environment where we needed to think about, are we moving slower, or have we actually increased the pace? Is it moving faster? Good or bad? Anybody want to speak to whether or not they feel like this has taken business development and license and interactions? Has it sped up? Has it slowed down? Is that a positive, a negative?
Well, from my perspective, when you have something called Operation Warp Speed, there's this tendency to want to move forward quickly, and so I think that in the area of COVID-19, all the deals are happening exceptionally fast. It's probably unprecedented in terms of the number of deals in a particular area, obviously, that have gotten done since the beginning of this year. And really, we became aware of the coronavirus just at the beginning of this year. And so to see all the progress in terms of deals being done, both from the non-dilutive perspective, where you're dealing with the government, to the more of a strategic deals, you see both of those, I think, moving more quickly in that area than you would expect in a normal environment. That being said, the impact on the clinical trials and how it slowed a lot of clinical trials down in other indication areas, I think that will have an effect of slowing down some of the licensing activities around those targets, because just as the science slows down, I think that the deal pace will also slow down to reflect that deals typically get done at about the same time in the development pathway in each case.
Okay.
Yeah, even though they're slowing down, I think, a little bit, but interestingly, in BioCentury News, if you're on that WeChat group or you're a subscriber, I'm reading, it says total funding for life sciences companies in first half of 20 nearly matches the amount raised in all of 2019. So, it's not necessarily in or out licensing, maybe M&A, but it's really amazing that how much money is still flowing into the market, even outside of anti-infectives and vaccines.
Okay. Thanks, Hugh. Well, why don't we move on to the next question? One of the things I thought I'd pose to the group is this idea of what have you done specifically kind of post-COVID-19 to maintain your structured approach to business development and licensing as far as activities? and to ensure that that structured approach allows you to still meet your objectives and your goals. Can I throw that over to Oscar to maybe kick us off?
Yeah, I think first of all, you need to know your company. And I joined my company right now, I'm working with last year. And you need first to understand your company, your goals, prepare the pitch deck and the way you are going to present the company to others. And I think that that's the first step from what you're calling a structure approach. I think it starts all internally, ensuring that you also understand where you're going and understanding also the context where we are right now, which is very positive. I agree with Hugh with what he said about the amount of deals and the way these biotech interactions are moving, but also making sure that you understand your competition and how those that are your targets are really interested in what you are delivering, and you also think about what other companies are offering. I have the impression that because of this situation, we are all much more time working from home, and I have a mix in terms of going to work or being here. I think that we have more time to think, which is something that is a little bit difficult to happen while you're commuting, or sometimes when you have a lot of administrative work when you're in the office. So I personally, and I give you my impression, I am more productive. And I've been able to really spend a lot of time with people in my organization, also understanding externally, getting help to look into competitors. And at the end of the day, we that work in this environment of business development have to be very structured. At the end of the day, you want to reach a deal and have a deal sheet that is going to reflect your interests. So I have a very, very positive take on the way we are going to see business development after this period of time in 1 or 2 years.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Oscar. I think there are some functions that are a lot more efficient than they've ever been, and that's great. I'm a little concerned as we look at the lab work and the clinical trials that in both cases have slowed down. And so, we can front load all of this, but we need to get people back in the labs and back running the clinical trials and really to see the fruit at the end of this.
Okay. Anything from the other panelists? Kyle, anything to add to this?
Well, I think as both we've said in the past, and Hugh and Oscar pointed out, that the time at home and the time away from traveling has presented a lot of opportunities to do more with the time that you had, because you're not traveling and whatnot. And I think that has also come with some more targeted efforts in terms of what you're trying to deliver. And I think that has really become part of the structure of business development, and that you identify targets much more discreetly, and that you can pursue individuals versus going to a conference where you may broadcast to a large number of people what you're trying to do, and that may find that one person in the back of the room that you didn't even know was interested in your technology. You can find that person through the conference, and I think here in this environment, it's more targeted in that you're searching that person out and you're identifying that person prior to meeting them. And I think it does pose its challenges, but it may be more effective in the long run. It's hard to say at this point.
Okay, very good. Well, why don't we move on to the next question? One of the things I thought I'd put out there is, I think historically in the past, companies have typically looked to in-license assets. It tends to be an event around phase 2, or at least what they're looking for are IND-ready packages. In today's climate, are we seeing that there's a trend to hold to that, or is there a change? And Hugh, can I throw that to you first?
Sure. You know, I think companies are always going to be looking for the high probability of success, but it's always a balance between reducing your risk by buying in later, but then of course increasing your cost as the packages and the validation clinically starts to become apparent. At Biocean, as I mentioned early, we have a lot of assets that are in the preclinical space and moving toward IND next year. We saw so much interest at Bio and even outside of Bio in a discovery portfolio or a lead asset portfolio that I was very surprised and happy about. And as I talk to a lot of these innovation groups within large companies, you know, the Janssen's and Pfizer's and Amgen's of the world, you know, they're interested in early stage assets as long as you have good targets, novel targets, innovative approaches. And you know, we saw this with the CAR Ts, we saw it with the bispecifics. You know, I think there's a lot of uptake in early development, more than I think ever before, as companies are competing for those key assets later in development. So I see a lot of interest early, more than I think I have in the past, in fact.
I agree with you on that point, Hugh. Typically, and we still hear it, right? People ask, when are you going to get to IND? When are you going to get through that phase 1 study? But we're also hearing and seeing a lot more these companies who are interested in filling in the very early stage of their pipeline, the discovery of the preclinical assets, because, well, you know, licensing an asset that is in phase 2, it de-risks that asset. Building out the earlier part of your portfolio de-risks your portfolio as a whole. You're not just hoping that that 1 or 2 assets you have in phase 2, phase 3 end up getting to market. You now have more of a full pipeline. You're bringing in assets across the different stages. So we're starting to see and hear these companies more and more want to bring in the early stage, want to bolster that early stage pipeline. So I think it's something that we'll continue to see grow.
Okay. Others to add? Kyle?
I would just contrast, you know, I don't disagree with what has been said, but at the same time, I think that also the emergency nature of this pandemic has driven a lot of interest in manufacturing and really late stage activity that really is purposed to solve the problem. And so I think in some situations, if you have an early asset, it's not really been that interesting in the context of COVID-19 because, you know, people want that solution immediately. They want it yesterday. And so, you know, I think that you see a lot of the activity in the first half of 2020 has been really at late stage manufacturing, vaccine production rather than early stage assets. And I think that, you know, to Hugh's data from BioCentury, I think a lot of the money flowing into the space is sort of directed at things that are really ready to go from or money towards making things ready to go from a vaccine perspective that, you know, obviously that money wasn't moving there prior to this.
Yeah, Novavax, I just saw, it's a local company here outside of Philadelphia. They just got $1.6 billion 2 days ago for vaccine manufacturing for a completely novel approach in vaccines for COVID. 1.6 billion for a very small company.
Let me give you a perspective from someone that has spent almost 20 years with corporate America, again, Abbott, AbbVie, Becton Dickinson, and also the past 8 years with biotechs, mostly in different roles. I think that what has been happening over the past couple of decades on corporate biopharma or big pharma looking for late stage assets mostly, so that they look into something that is going to beef up their commercial efforts, is still there. That's my impression, that they are still looking into a way to ensure that commercially, to use that word, everything is working. On the other hand, we have now more and more biotech companies that have a lot of assets in their discovery portfolio that are tremendously interesting. And then there is also academia that is where there is also an explosion in knowledge. So what I'm seeing from big pharma especially is that at the end of the day, in the back of their minds, they want to acquire a late stage asset, but they also want to learn. They want to learn, they want to understand the different technologies, they want to see what a platform can do for them potentially in the future. So I see this interest in learning, in understanding, but when it goes to targeted acquisitions or targeted M&A, that's where I see them still going to their standard playbook. From a biotech perspective, is sometimes a little bit frustrating because you spend lots of time with these pharmas, you get excited, and then you notice that, yeah, like in our case, for instance, we are in a pre-IND stage. We expect to start our first in-man early next year. So this is something that you dream, but difficult to happen. At least that has been my experience. But still, it's worthwhile, and that's something that we do to ensure that we have a relationship with this big pharma, because now you know some people in their BD groups or so, and you can always go back to them when you're a little bit more advanced. That's at least has been my experience in the past year or so.
Yep. Okay. You're spot on.
Go ahead, you.
Yeah, no, I think Oscar's spot on. And it's funny because even internally within large companies, the early discovery portfolio always gets deprioritized. It's always a real challenge to get the investment into the early discovery portfolio internally in a company compared to the phase 2 and 3 studies that are always get all the cash. So that's the way it works. But if you have those novel targets and you have some innovative approaches, and I think you're right on, Oscar, the new technologies, how can they be helped in the future? I think there's still a lot of cash to be spent, and I think companies want to make sure that they're going to be there. And it may take a couple of years to get there, but they're gonna be smart enough to invest, maybe not on the same timeline that we're interested in, but they see the value in that. So there's still a lot of hope and fruitfulness to come.
Okay. Thanks, Hugh. We're going to move on to the next question, but one of the things I just want to remind everybody, again, we do want to take questions from the audience. So you have the ability on Zoom in the chat box if you want to throw in your questions. Like I said, we're going to try to cut at the last 15 minutes of our discussion today, and we'll try to get to any and all questions that are being asked. But just a reminder, one of the things I'd like to kind of switch gears a little bit is here at Kineticos, we actually put out a survey just to try to get the sense of what was going on as far as confidence level with leadership around biotech within this area of business development and licensing. And one of the things we found that was kind of interesting, and I'm going to throw this question to Nathan because he has some understanding of this data, but what we found was as Kineticos put that information out to well over 100 leaders, was that 87% of biotech leadership held pretty confident that their in-licensing timelines, the targets that they were trying to hit, were on track and would stay on track. Interesting enough, though, if you looked at it on the side of out-licensing, that number, the confidence was only about 45% of leaders felt like that their confidence of holding to their timeline and staying on target it dropped, as I said, down into that 45%. So the question I was going to ask maybe Nathan to start off with, and then maybe pass it to others, is why is there such that drastic difference between those two sides of what should seem to be the same equation?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. And when you look at the in-licensing side, a lot of times these are companies that have made the strategic decision before COVID happened. So they had budget in mind, they had money set aside to say, we're going to use this for in-licensing. So it's built in already for that process, which is why I imagine these leaders feel confident their timelines are going to go through because their money set aside. And so for them, they're really driving that timeline. On the flip side, for out-licensing, it's interesting to see that they see timelines delayed. And there's a few things I know we're going to ask a question about later. Is it due to the clinical trials being delayed? So do they feel that they're not going to get to their next data point at a time that they thought 5-6 months ago. And so that's going to delay their partnering efforts. And there's just a lot of unknown from the out-licensing partners with some of these more opportunistic big pharma, larger biotechs, where they might not be actively looking to in-license, but they take more of an opportunistic approach. So if the right asset at the right time comes to their doorstep, they're always looking for that, but they're not making it a strong priority to go out and target that in-licensing. And when you have that, you don't necessarily know if that partner is going to be putting things on hold due to COVID, or if they have it already broken out in the budget that they're able to make these decisions to in-license if it wasn't already a set strategy and priority back in end of last year, January, February, before this really hit. So I think it could be, a mix of the clinical trials being delayed and a mix of the uncertainty with if your partner really has it already built into their budget, or if they're just being opportunistic with discussions and looking at these potential assets.
Okay. Well, why don't, Oscar, could I maybe bring it over to you and see what you think about this?
So I think that one of the explanations for that would be that the acquirer, or the one that is looking to in-license, has a more clear idea of what they are looking for. So they are basically targeting into some ideas, some type of assets that are going to fit with their interests. On the other hand, when you are in my position right now, when you're a biotech that you have your own asset and you know where you are doing a little bit of a fishing expedition. You prepare your pitch, you know about you, but you don't know about what others are thinking about what you are providing. And I think that that's why there is more insecurity, because we also notice, as I mentioned before, and I'm going to repeat what I said, that some companies are just learning, want to know about what you're bringing to the table. I am in the gene therapy space, gene editing space, and obviously this is a very attractive area, and they want to meet with our gene editing expert, and they want to understand about where we're going to be, maybe, believe it or not, in 4 years. And that's something that is a bit frustrating for us, and that's why we reduce our expectations.
Okay. Others on the panel?
I think that one aspect of this question goes to the capacity of big pharma to actually conduct business development. You have to do due diligence. You have to get contracts executed. The labor of business development is not negligible. And so when you see this huge surge of COVID-19 related transactions occurring, you just have to know that does put a squeeze on the amount of business development that big pharma can do outside of that space. There's only so many big deals that a big pharma company, even big pharma, can do at one time, right? And so I think that may be some of the reflected in the data. If you're really pursuing those technologies outside and you're bringing those in, I don't think that labor is in shortage. But if you're pushing something that may not be COVID-19 related, and you're looking for a licensing partner in that space, it may be that some of the people that you would ordinarily talk to are already engaged in COVID-19 related discussions. And so it may just be an availability of the business development folks within the big pharma to actually do the deals.
Okay. All right. Anything else to add, or we'll move to the next question? All right. It was already brought up. Nathan kind of brought this into the discussion, but I thought one of the things that we would look at, and we know it's out there, is obviously clinical trials have been impacted. We all know that. So maybe looking at this from how will the impact on clinical trials from design, recruitment, the management of these trials, how do you see that overall impacting your business development and licensing approach and your efforts? Oscar, can you speak to that? And can you speak to it? Is it a concern, or is it it's an actual reality for you at this point?
It is a reality. It's a big concern. It has a massive impact. And when we interact with potential CROs, and we went just recently through a selection process, this was a topic that was coming up all the time. So now we think that I'm lucky in some way, because in gene therapy is one and done. So that means that you practically give the patient an infusion, and then you are able to insert the gene, and the gene starts doing the job. We still need to monitor those patients over time. And that's what becomes very difficult. I think that to bring a patient for 8 hours, that's what we need, indeed, to give the actual therapy, is fine. But we need to follow up those patients. And that's something that makes it very difficult, because hospitals, in some cases, as we are hearing in the news, are now overwhelmed, and people are reducing elective type of surgeries and visits and so on. So that's having an impact. The way we are dealing with that is that we are writing contingent elements in our contracts with the CROs, where we are including now remote monitoring from which might be not bringing lots of additional costs, but sometimes we need traveling nurses, which means that the nurse is going to go to the patient side and basically conduct or fill in a CRF, or collect blood and do this testing. The patients sometimes need to go also to the hospital for MRIs or just to be examined by the doctor. So this is having a tremendous impact. I have no doubt that this is delaying development. And for some programs, what I'm hearing and what I'm reading is that is having even a big impact. And the agency has even put together a number of guidance papers to help companies navigate this difficult situation. So this is something that we, CROs, the agency, everyone is considering very, very seriously.
Okay. Others to add to that?
Yeah, I'm really actually quite concerned as we look to the future. It's actually the slowdown in clinical trials has allowed a lot of companies with discovery and early development portfolios to catch up, because CROs are still working, full on. And so that's been the good news. CROs and CMOs don't seem to have had a slowdown in their business. And so if you have a late discovery, early preclinical portfolio, you can really move it very quickly toward IND at the same pace. It'll be really interesting, Oscar. You bring up a lot of interesting points and concerns. What are those trials going to look like a year from now? And what types of precautions are we going to have to take? And even in the inclusion-exclusion criteria within those trials is going to be a little bit more interesting, I think, as well. So, in the past, we've, excluded HIV and a number of other things. And here, I think we're going to have a fair amount of comorbidities, and I think we're going to have a fair amount of infectious, antibody positive individuals for COVID, et cetera. And how is that going to impact, the drug trial? Because I'm not sure if that's going to have any downstream consequences in terms of drug-drug interaction or their health interacting and being able to join those trials. It's going to be interesting.
I'd just like to second that point. I mean, I think that with, I can say within our own company, we've had an opportunity to keep on running forward at very high speeds. And so I think that a lot of companies in development stage, preclinical stage companies are doing that right now, moving ahead and playing catch up to some extent in terms of preparing for our clinical trials. And it's really going to be interesting when clinical trials start going at full pace again, how much competition it's going to be to get access to those clinical trial sites and to get the populations that you need for your clinical trials, because there may have been sort of a bolus of clinical trial activity that's been building up through coronavirus shutdowns. And then when that sort of releases, whenever that happens in the future, it could be a pretty fierce competition for actually conducting those trials from both a the clinical trial resources, but also just the patient populations.
Yep.
Yeah,
Thanks, Kyle.
interesting points. And I think of it on more of the trial design side of things as you start getting into some of these conversations with potential partners, getting into diligence, and they start looking at the trial designs. How is that going to start impacting, comparing it to what the benchmark is, right? If we're having to start doing remote monitoring or using more digital health technologies, for gene therapy, there's a lot of long-term follow-up testing. How does that start occurring? And so how do these trial designs, how does that impact when you're doing diligence if you can't one-to-one compare it to, benchmarks that have already happened? So how will that start impacting diligence and how potential partners look at these assets? And will it increase timelines? Will it take them longer? Will they have more questions? So I think the design of how people have to be changed with more going remotely and the decrease of people wanting to go into clinics or hospitals, I think that'll be an interesting take as we see things progress through these trials. This isn't ending anytime soon. And so how we see the design and what we have to change with new technologies and doing things more remotely, how will that impact the diligence side of these licensing deals?
So guys, I want to throw another question out here. I think we're getting kind of to the end of our time for questions, but I think this is kind of the overriding theme of what we're discussing. But the question I have is, given the intensity and the cost and the time that's being thrown into vaccines and infection, what's your experience with the redirection of licensing assets and those efforts, and has it directly impacted you guys with your own BD and licensing activities? And
Is it Philip that's locked up?
I think it might be Philip. Hugh, I know we are directing this question towards you, but what has your experience been with kind of the redirection of licensing dollars into COVID-19 related assets and efforts?
That BARDA, which was generally doing work across a number of areas, at one point, I think in early March, they completely shut down any really correspondence about anything besides COVID-19. They basically shut down all their submissions except for the coronavirus related topics. And so I think that's a little bit unique to the government response. I think that corporations are still looking at their portfolio holistically and looking at it with a long range view. But I do think that it's at least impacted some parties that you might be dealing with.
Yeah, I mean,
yep.
Sorry, go ahead, Oscar.
No, Ian, I agree. I see these opportunities that are popping up all the time for everything that is COVID related, and we indeed look for non-dilutive investments through the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine. We submitted a grant for using one of our cell therapies for COVID-19, and we immediately saw first excitement inside the company, and then lots of people also helping us and understanding what we're doing, and that helped us. The people to understand our allogeneic therapy, which is a stem cell therapy that was originally focused on patients with something called acute graft versus host disease. Now that can be also used for some patients with acute respiratory distress syndrome on COVID. So again, I think that companies are also looking into their portfolios and see how they can adapt it to this situation. And we're all learning. And at the end of the day, we are all in this together, and we really try to help. So I think that the government is doing the right thing, and companies are also looking very carefully into all their assets and see how we can all help to beat this pandemic.
Yep. Were there questions coming in from the audience? We can go.
Yeah, we want to go to Pamela's question. It's a good one. I don't have a good answer. Prior to COVID, biopharma pricing was a political football. Will COVID convey goodwill to the industry, or will the debt incurred by major economies refocus politics on biopharm? And how will that impact valuations and deals? a really good question.
I think this has a lot to do with outcomes. I think that we're gonna, I think biopharma is to some extent testing, is going through a testing period, right? I know a lot of money has flown into pharma that has historically maybe been outside of pharma. And to investors, I think they're going to be curious about how their returns are in this pharma space. And I think that, you know, their lessons learned out of their initial investments will be things that they move on with beyond coronavirus. So if they have a good experience, they may stay in pharma in terms of investors. But if they get burnt through this process, I could see it having a negative impact. And I think that the same thing goes with drug pricing. You know, if biopharma is the solution to this problem that we all hope it can be, I think that the public will give biopharma a little bit of a pass on drug pricing. If this plays out in a natural way, that the vaccine isn't effective or there's no therapeutics that are identified, I think a lot of people will even scrutinize the cost of pharmaceuticals even more.
Yeah, you make an excellent point. And, you know, the key is health economic impact, right? Because we already had this question with CAR-Ts and all this allogeneic work that we're trying to move toward. Everything's autologous at this point. And, you know, the costs are $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 per patient, which is unsustainable. So, you know, I think biopharm pricing was going to be, you know, a topic as we move to these interesting new platforms and technologies. And Oscar, with your gene therapy, you know, how do you price that relative to, you know, an antibody, for instance?
Yeah, I think that drug prices is an extremely complex topic. I personally think that the big issue is politics, or the lack of interest from of politicians to take a look into that. And I say that from my perspective as an European. And you know, Germany, Spain, Italy, France, all these countries have already resolved this. There is no one talks about drug prices. That's only happening here because there is no way to negotiate with companies, and they're getting a pass. So that has to end. We all know that it has to happen because this is, you mentioned the key word. This is unsustainable. Explosion of costs in healthcare, which is going to go through the entire society, where we are all going to realize that the societies have to put more and more money into healthcare. And that goes beyond pharmaceutical companies and prices that this is a realization. I think that this process that was already taking place is going to accelerate, but there is no doubt that the industry will need to be really cost effective, which is the key here. Is ensuring that you bring a therapy, and we're talking about the therapy that we're bringing to the market for patients with hemophilia. It's going to be one single treatment. The cost that right now BioMarin is bringing one of their drugs to the market in August is going to be about $2 million. But you know, if that drug works, they're going to save another $2 million, because that will be the cost of those patients in the US being treated for the rest of their life with hemophilia and with everything related to that. So it's all about cost effectiveness.
Sorry. Do we have a question? Well, I did have one other question I thought I would pose to everybody. And maybe it's something that we can spend the last minutes talking about before we go to key takeaways. But I mean, obviously you know, COVID-19 continues to play a role here, but with kind of the political pressures, the situation that exists between US and China, some of that already existed, but COVID-19 overlaid to that. From the panel, are we seeing that companies are experience any kind of trend away from US-based companies partnering with China, or vice versa, China companies partnering with the US? Has there been any impact there? Can I throw that out to maybe you to start off with?
Yeah. Can you rephrase the question?
Well, again, just looking at what's going on with COVID-19 and some of the ongoing trade issues that have been out there before, but then you overlay the COVID-19. Has this in any way impacted your ability to work with Chinese companies wanting to work with you guys, or looking at the possibility on the other side of Chinese companies moving product into the U.S.?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, no, actually, the interesting thing for me is we're seeing interest all over. China really is putting still a lot of money into biotech, maybe even more than they ever have. And they're doing it both in the U.S. and in China. And then at Bio, again, our one reference point with so many different companies all over the world, we had a lot of interest from Europe. And at this point, we're a Nanjing-based discovery company and a U.S.-based development effort. And so they can work with either side. But it was really interesting to see that there was no real impact in my mind, no questions about how do we work with you in China with your discovery folks. It pretty much was a world-based economy still as most people approach those meetings.
Okay. And Oscar, go ahead. I'm sorry, Kyle.
I'm sorry. I just, when I think about the impact of COVID-19 on this, I think it's a lot less significant than some of the other structural things that had changed prior to COVID-19 in terms of the impact on particularly Chinese investment in U.S. biotech. And the big one being the changes in CFIUS, the Committee for Foreign Investment in U.S. companies. And I think that had a broader impact on investment in the U.S. by Chinese than the coronavirus. And I can't really speak of the other direction in terms of U.S. investment in China. I'm not sure how that's been impacted.
It is definitely harder to move money back and forth between China and the U.S. That's for sure.
Okay. And Oscar, I know you have some experience here with your investors and your business.
Yeah. I'm totally biased here. So my company is totally funded by Chinese capital. My CEO was born and raised in China, American citizen, and he has been working with China investors and collaborators and academia for the past 12 years. So we are very close to them. If anything, in the past few months, I would say, things are accelerated, and the Chinese investors that have already lots of experience in the US are accelerating their kind of interest on not only us but other companies, and ensure that we all work together. I think that we're going through a difficult period on the relationships between especially China and the US. My impression is that will pass, especially it should, because we're talking here about a space that is growing very rapidly both in the US and China. Maybe if we talk about technology, the Apples, the Ciscos, the Facebooks, the US has a real advantage over China. In terms of biotech at all levels, I don't think that difference is that big. And my impression is that they're going to get closer. And also there's something going on, and we've been hearing about that. When we hear about all the advances in coronavirus, in genomics, in sequences, in vaccines, a lot of information came from China. So everyone is there very open. So this is a little bit an area where I think that once we the waters get a little bit calmer, we are all going to see the benefits of a real, true, strong collaboration between US, China, and the rest of the world. Because this is the way we are as scientists and as an industry. We look beyond political differences at a single special point in time.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, I know we're up against time here. What I'd like to do is I'd just like to go to each one of the panelists and maybe just to close this out, if you could, maybe just a couple key takeaways that you'd like to share with the group, and maybe speak about, what are those couple things that or insights, takeaways based on this conversation, that would be great. Thank you. Who wants to start?
I think, go ahead, you.
Yeah, no, I think what I heard and the survey that Connecticut's did, I think that everyone is still really positive about, the biotech industry, the value to society, moving key and novel programs forward, no matter what their stage of development. There's a lot of need in the world, of course, even outside of COVID. And so I think this is an industry that's going to continue to grow. We're going to have some issues as we move into the clinical situation. But I think, we're all smart and dedicated, people. And I think we're going to figure out how to get around that, just like we figured out how to work effectively over these last 4 months. I think we'll figure out how to get through that next stage as well.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and I don't have anything to add to what you just said. So I am very optimistic. I think that the industry is coming back together, or we have always been together, but this is bringing us closer to each other. So extraordinarily happy about the process, and very, 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 very happy to be in this industry.
Okay. Thank you, Oscar. Kyle, anything to add?
Not really. I think that this, like I said before, it's a great opportunity for biopharma to contribute to the global economic output, and I think it's an opportunity that I hope that the industry as a whole can take advantage of fully.
Okay. Nathan, can we finish with you?
Yeah, and just to reflect, I think there is a lot of optimism within the industry and on the licensing side, right? These conversations are still happening, deals are still happening. So while, some people have a little bit of pessimism about the timelines for it, we're still seeing everything moving forward. So now's the time to do it. It's not the time to slow down, but it's the time to keep pushing forward. So I think that's a big takeaway, is just to keep moving these partnering discussions forward. That way we can keep moving these game-changing potential drugs forward.
Yeah, and I would agree with you, Nathan. I think it speaks well to the fact that we've got a limited audience here, but we also see with everybody the optimism, the ability to move forward. And ultimately, I know that the most important thing for all of us, obviously, is to get those right therapeutics to the market that are going to change people's lives. And that's great to see that we're all very optimistic that we can continue to move forward, even though we're in a very new norm with COVID-19. So thank everybody. I appreciate everybody joining us today. Again, I want to thank everybody for being here today, for joining us for this sixth panel discussion for COVID-19. Again, it is brought to you by Connecticut's Life Sciences. Let me again thank you. I especially want to thank all of our panelists for their participation. If anything, one of the things we saw right in the middle of this discussion is both the benefits of the technology that allows us to do this, but also some of the technical challenges that it can create, especially when I'm on a phone call and on my computer at the same time. We know what feedback sounds like. But again, I appreciate all the panelists. Hugh, thanks for stepping up to moderate there for a couple minutes. And again, I hope everybody can come back. Please join us in about 2 weeks. We're going to come back with another panel discussion, and that panel discussion is going to focus on venture capitalists and the impacts around venture capital in the COVID-19 world. But until then, again, thank you for joining us. Everyone have a safe, enjoyable weekend. We'll speak to you soon. Thank you very much.